A Shalom Akim Shalom Shalom, all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of wanted to read through this article in regards to the U.S. fertility rate. So this is on live5news.com, and it says the fertility rate has reached an all-new low. CDC data shows. So the CDC essentially is the Center of Disease Control, and it says the fertility rate in the U.S. has dropped in an all-time low in 2024. This was published in this came out a couple of days ago, so this was Friday, right? And it says with less than 1.6 kids per woman. It says new federal data released Thursday shows, it says the U.S. was once among only a developed country with the rate that ensured each generation had enough children to replace itself, about 2.1 kids per woman. It has been sliding in America for close to 2 decades as more women are waiting longer to have children and never taking that step at all, right? So essentially, the way they word the article is very interesting because they forget the fact that, you know, it's mostly women that are the ones that are attending universities, and it's mostly women that are sold this philosophies of the serpent, you know, when it comes to when it's in regarding having children, because now children in this side of the world are essentially seen as a burden. They're seen as a bad thing. They're seen as a waste of time. You know, they're kind of essentially things are turned upside down in this society, and a lot of this is because of those philosophies of the serpent. Don't be a wife, don't be a mother, don't raise your children, hand the children over to the state and let us indoctrinate your children, right? Let's push the alphabet agenda in front of them so we can turn them inside out, right? So now essentially you're being attacked on multiple different, fronts, right? So it says a new statistic on the par with the fertility rates in Western European countries, according to World Bank data. It says, alarmed by recent drops, the Trump administration has taken increased falling birth rates, like issuing an executive order meant to expand access and reduce costs of in vitro fertilization, and backing the idea of baby bonuses that might encourage more couples to have kids, right? So I'm just gonna kind of jump around, but let me start off with this precept here, because children are really and are a wonderful thing when you really think about it. To see your children grow up, and not only for them to actually grow up, but for them to actually, have a mind towards the Lord, right? That's just one of the things that's one of the reasons why a lot of these children in this society are so messed up, because they weren't taught the ways of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. They weren't taught the importance of the law, honoring your father and your mother, being, responsible, not having, and not taking, another man's wife, things of that nature, essentially just keeping in mind the ways of the Lord, right? Our children are not taught this, so essentially they become a terror onto this spiritually Sodom and Egypt, right? AKA known as America, right? So I just want to start off with this precept here. This is Psalms chapter, this is the wrong chapter. Okay, this is Psalms chapter 127, verse 3, and it says, Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord Yahweh, Bashem El Shai, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Your children grow up, they continue on, because that's really the purpose, is really to continue on the seed and continue on the family name, right? And our people don't have a mindset when it comes to continuing the bloodline, right? They don't have that type of righteous understanding. That was one of my favorite things about that. There was a TV show I used to watch back in the day called Game of Thrones. A lot of the times, majority of the times, the mindset of these different families that you read about, their mindset was to continue on the legacy, continue on that last name. This is verse 4. I'm sorry, verse 5. And it says, Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. He shall not be ashamed, they shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Right? So, in this society, it is seen as a shame for a man to have a lot of children. And this is going back to the point I read earlier in regards to those serpent philosophies. And this is just one aspect of why there's a decline in a lot of people having children, right? One of the reasons is because of the philosophies that surrounds having children. The pedestalization of women and this heavy push to have them in the workplace. When you have them in the workplace, then they're not at home taking care of their children, feeding their children the right proper foods, teaching their children about the ways of their forefathers and the ways of their foremothers, right? Getting that, important nutrients from the breast milk, right? Because that's all important too, because the woman's function in righteousness, in order, serves a very important role into raising the children, into providing a nurturing environment towards the household, right? There was an article I read, for example, and when it comes to Alexander the Great, one of the things that that gave him, ultimately was the Most High, but the Lord pretty much gave him a very, very nurturing mother, right? So he would actually give him that sentiment of confidence. You know what I'm saying? Ultimately, he had to fulfill prophecy, but the point is his nurturing, added to that. You know what I'm saying? In this society, a man to have a lot of children is essentially seen as a bad thing. Like for example, just using Nick Cannon as an example. Nick Cannon, he has, I believe it's about more than 10, right? That's how much we should normally have, but these days, because things are so expensive, they don't have the mindset to actually have children if they can't even afford a place to put the children. And I'm not talking about a crib, I'm talking about like having just a house alone, because we're living in a society where Esau is essentially hoarding a lot of the resources for themselves, right? So I went to ChatGPT. Okay, actually, let me get this 1 second. Actually, let me go to Proverbs. Just bear with me on this. 29. This is Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2. Excuse me. And it says, When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And what do you have in the society right now? You have people who are mourning about the state, about the economy. You have Gen Z, these generations that are after, like millennials, Gen Alpha. You have these different generations now that are struggling to find work. They've bought into this bold-faced lie of going into the schools, investing in a career, and coming out, they can't even afford or even pay for for certain things. Like it's becoming a lot harder to actually have a house, because this is like foundational. You don't want to have children and then get the house after. You want to get the house first and then have the children, right? That's just common sense, right? Because you're gonna have you need a place to put the children, right? So, but in this society, everything is kind of upside down. Starting off with the actual philosophies that is perpetuated in this side of the world, right? So, and I went to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said that polygamy, which is a man having more than one wife at the same time, is actually illegal in both Canada and the US. So now you have unrighteous decrees put on top of that, because we know that a man can have more than one wife, if it be his desire. And if these laws were actually implemented, the ways of the Lord were actually implemented, you wouldn't have this problem in the first place. So, for example, there are other countries that are suffering from this. For example, you have South Korea, you have Japan. Let me see, actually, let me look this up real quick. Okay, so it says China, Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, Russia, Taiwan, and the list goes on, right? So you have a lot of these developed nations that are suffering from, basically, they don't have they have an aging population, but they don't have a young population that's replenishing. You kind of have a population now that's kind of more about living in the moment rather than living about and caring about, family, caring about, continuing the bloodline. Like, people don't care about these things. They just care about right now. It's all about right now. What can I get right now? I just want to make it till Friday. That's the mindset of a lot of these people right now. Let me go here. This is Isaiah chapter 24, verse 4. And it says, "The earth mourneth and fadeth away, the world languisheth and fadeth away, the haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth is also defiled by the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant." And I'm reading this because if you had the practice of actual having polygamy implemented within the society, then you would have a lot more men with their families be able to actually to generate more wealth, right? You would have these things put forth in place, and then a man can actually be able to provide and take care of, because then you have more hands on deck. That's another reason too, right? But you live in a society where that is vilified, right? A lot of women don't they don't subscribe to the idea, going back into the philosophies, because they've been strongly pedestalized in this society. And another part of this, why I wanted to read this also, because now that how a lot of women are outside of the workplace, now essentially you're subjected to the ordinances of the devil now. So, for example, the Sabbath, right? Esau doesn't keep in mind the Sabbath, right? So what happens now? People are overworked. They're constantly being overworked, and then you have a culture that's constantly overworked. Then you don't have people that care about other things, and things are so expensive too because Esau is essentially hoarding a lot of the resources to himself. So let me get that in Sirach. This is Sirach chapter 14, verse 3, and it says, riches are not comely for a niggard, and what should an envious man do with money? Right? So Esau is a person who is a niggard. He doesn't actually distribute and give people the opportunity to actually, acquire a lot of wealth. And then when people think they're acquiring a lot of wealth, it's not the wealth is not actually backed by anything. So Esau is not somebody. These people are not. They're not. They're essentially. They don't have the mindset of They have the mindset of people who are just corrupt. The scriptures talk about how an unwise king will destroy his people, because now you have other plethora of different problems, right? Where you have generations that are growing up and then they're just not having children. You have an over-sexualized culture. People are just thinking about right now condoms. Let's wrap it up. I don't want to have children. This is a burden because things are so expensive. People are not thinking like this. They can't afford to, they can't afford to, have children. Because Esau makes it a burden in the society, right? So, I think I'll read that last one. That's Sirach 10. Sirach 10 and 3, and it says, an unwise king destroyeth his people, but through the prudence of them which are in authority, the city shall be inhabited, right? So you just now have essentially an aging population, but now you don't have people who are pretty much replenishing the population. So what happens? It becomes stagnant. The old people start to die off, right? And then you essentially the population just starts to dwindle. So it leads to other problems. So that's why a lot of these countries now have to implement other measures such as immigration, which is causing other problems. A lot of sedition. People are more clinging to their own people. And when they come here also, they're following the same blueprint, right? So Esau is not the right person, and he's not a fit person to rule. As a matter of fact, I'll end off with this last precept in Wisdom of Solomon. Just bear with me 1 second. It says, Wisdom of Solomon 6, verse 24. It says, but the multitude of the wise is in the welfare of the world, and a wise king is upholding of the people, right? So the kingdom of heaven is going to have wise management, wise rulership, because they're going to keep in mind Yahushua, King David, the heads, the elect will keep in mind the ways of the Lord, and the ways of the Lord, when you really think about it, is really and truly what's needed to put the earth back into proper function, to put things back in order so things are functioning properly, right? Everything is kind of just out of whack. You have, think of it as a puzzle. You have the circle peg in the square hole. You have the triangle peg in the circle hole, trying to fit into the circle hole. Things are just out of place and out of order. Things are not functioning as the Heavenly Father intended it to be, right? So everything is just out of whack in this society, right? Esau is not somebody who is he's not a type of person who is fit to actually manage the way the earth is supposed to function. He has a God complex, right? But it's not in righteousness, because the scriptures talk about how the knowledge of wickedness is not wisdom. Why? Because there is no fear. Everything is kind of out of order. Everything is out of whack, right? So you have these different plethora of different problems occurring within your society. So, anyways, I just wanted to touch on that real quick. Lord's will, this was quick and edifying. I'd just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.